For 12 long years, I poured every drop of ambition and grit into Ainsworth Logistics, the company my father, Edward Ainsworth, had built from the ground up. When he founded it decades ago, it was nothing more than a small regional shipping company that barely turned a profit. I still remember those early years, the long nights he spent away from home, the lines of worry etched deep into his face as he fought to keep the business afloat. Even as a child, I understood that failure was not an option for him, that every deal, every contract was a lifeline. When I turned 24, fresh out of business school, I finally convinced him to let me join the company, not as a figurehead or a quiet helper, but as a partner. But make no mistake, I had to fight for that chance. My father believed in tradition, in legacy and bloodlines. To him, the daughter was never meant to inherit the empire. She was meant to support it from the sidelines. I refused to accept that. I worked twice as hard, stayed up later than anyone else, and took risks no one else dared to take. Over those 12 years, I turned Ainsworth Logistics from a fragile family business into a powerhouse that dominated the national market. I negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts with precision, cut unnecessary costs, and implemented new technology that streamlined operations. Under my leadership, annual revenue soared to $80 million, but even as I celebrated these victories, I knew that my father never truly saw me as his successor. He smiled at board meetings and praised me in front of investors, but behind closed doors, I could feel the weight of his expectations that I would one day step aside for my brother Owen. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that if I worked hard enough, if I kept proving my worth, he would see me not just as his daughter, but as the future of this company. That night at the family dinner shattered that illusion for good. We sat at the long mahogany dining table, candles flickering in antique brass holders. Our family and close friends gathered for what was supposed to be a celebration. I wore my best navy blue dress and my most convincing smile, even as my gut told me something was wrong. My father stood at the head of the table, his glass of wine raised in a silent toast. And then, with that same calm, unwavering voice I had grown up hearing, he made his announcement. Owen will be taking over as CEO. The words cut deeper than any blade. I felt the air vanish from the room, the clinking of silverware fading into a hush as everyone turned to look at me. Owen, the brother, who had spent the last decade bouncing from one half-baked venture to the next, whose greatest skill was always being in the right place at the right time, sat there smirking as if he'd won a prize he'd never earned. I forced my lips into a polite smile, raising my glass, as if to toast his success, but inside a fire was already building. My father might have thought this was the end of my chapter at Ainsworth Logistics. He couldn't have been more wrong, because in that moment, I made a silent promise to myself I would not let them steal the empire I had built. Not without a fight. As the applause settled and the dinner plates were cleared, I found myself caught in a haze of disbelief. My father's words, "Owen will be taking over as CEO," echoed in my mind like a broken record. The room still filled with the warm glow of candles, and the polite hum of conversation felt suddenly cold, as if a draft had blown in from some hidden crack in the walls. I excused myself with a smile, my voice calm and measured, but inside my heart was pounding so hard, I was sure they could all hear it. In the dimly lit hallway, I steadied myself against the cool marble of the entryway. My reflection stared back at me from the ornate mirror, my hair perfectly in place, my lipstick unsmudged, every inch of me polished and composed. But behind my eyes there was a storm. I took a slow, deliberate breath and forced my shoulders back. No one could see me shaken. In this family, showing pain was weakness, and I had spent my entire life proving that I was anything but weak. I returned to the table just in time to see Owen holding court, his glass raised in a show of false modesty as he accepted congratulations from our relatives. He looked so self-satisfied, so certain of his place in this story that had never really been his. My father, Edward, rested a proud hand on his shoulder, his expression glowing with approval. I had seen that look in his eyes only once before, when he signed the papers that gave him his first real contract back when he was still a young man trying to make a name for himself. It stung to see him offer that same pride to Owen now, as if my years of dedication and sacrifice had never happened. As the evening wound down, my mother caught my eye across the table. Her face was calm, but I saw the flicker of understanding in her gaze. She had always been the quiet observer, the one who saw more than she said. But she would never interfere. She never did. In this family, there was an unspoken rule: the patriarch's word was final, and a daughter's devotion was expected, not celebrated. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling, every second of the past 12 years flashing through my mind. The nights I had stayed late at the office, the deals I had brokered that saved us from ruin, the relationships that had crumbled under the weight of my ambition, sacrifices I had made without hesitation, because I believed they would secure my place, my legacy. I had convinced myself that if I just kept building, kept winning, my father would have no choice but to see me as his equal. But I understood now he had never truly seen me. To him, my work had been a placeholder, a way station, until his son found his footing. It didn't matter that Owen had never spent a single late night in the office, never learned the difference between a balance sheet and a ledger, never negotiated a contract worth a damn. Owen was the son, and I was the daughter. And that, in my father's eyes, was all that mattered. I thought back to my first day at Ainsworth Logistics. I had walked into that office determined to prove myself, wearing a suit that felt too big and heels that pinched my feet, my stomach, a knot of nerves and excitement. I'd been so young, so hungry for the chance to show that I could be more than just Edward Ainsworth's daughter. In those early days, I had believed that hard work was the only currency that mattered. But tonight, I saw the truth in sharp relief. In this world, bloodlines carried more weight than blood, and tradition was the excuse they used to keep women like me in the shadows. As the hours ticked by, I moved from my bed to my home office, the only place where I could think clearly. The moonlight spilled through the tall windows, casting long shadows across my desk. I sat down and powered on my computer, the familiar glow of the screen calming my racing mind. My fingers hovered over the keys as I opened files, pulled up contracts, scanned every document I had carefully archived over the years. I knew this company better than anyone. I knew its secrets, its weaknesses, and most importantly, its strengths. My father and Owen thought they were dealing with the same girl who had once asked for permission to join the family business. They didn't realize that in those 12 years, I had done more than just build Ainsworth Logistics. I had fortified my place in it. I had quietly amassed enough shares, enough leverage, to ensure that no one could push me out. Not without a fight. I felt a spark of something fierce ignite in my chest as I worked through the night. Each document I pulled up was a reminder of what I had built, what I refused to let them take from me. This was not just about a title. It was about everything I had given up to see this company thrive. My father thought he could rewrite the narrative of my life in a single dinner announcement. He didn't understand that I had been writing my own story all along. By the time the sun rose, a pale pink glow painting the city skyline outside my window, I felt calm, clear in a way I hadn't been in years. The betrayal still burned, but it had been transformed into something sharper, something I could use. My father had made his decision. Now it was time for me to make mine. I shut down my computer and leaned back in my chair, the quiet of the morning wrapping around me like a shroud. In that silence, I found my resolve. My father and Owen had mistaken my silence for surrender. They thought that because I hadn't spoken up at dinner, I was ready to step aside. But they didn't know me at all. In that stillness, I promised myself one thing: I would not let them erase me. I would not let them hand my life's work to someone who hadn't earned it. I would make them understand that I was not just Edward Ainsworth's daughter. I was the woman who had built this empire, and I would be damned if I let them take it away. Tomorrow, I would walk into that office not as the daughter they had underestimated, but as the leader they could never ignore. And this time, I wouldn't be asking for permission. The next morning dawned bright and cloudless, the summer sun streaming through my windows, as if mocking the storm that brewed inside me. My father and Owen believed that last night's announcement was the end of the story, that I would quietly step aside and let them claim the empire I had built. But they were wrong. If they thought I would surrender, they had underestimated me gravely. As I showered and dressed in my sharpest navy pantsuit, the same one I had worn to broker our biggest deal last year, I felt a surge of icy determination settle over me. Today was not just another day at the office. Today was the day I would begin to reclaim what was mine. I walked through the front doors of Ainsworth Logistics headquarters, as I had done every morning for the last 12 years. The marble floors gleamed under the soft overhead lighting, the hum of conversation, and ringing phones, creating a familiar soundtrack. But today, I noticed the subtle shift in the air, the hushed whispers that fell silent when I passed the nervous glances exchanged behind coffee cups and computer screens. Word of my father's announcement had spread fast. I didn't let it faze me. I walked with my head held high, my heels clicking a steady, deliberate rhythm against the polished floor. Each step was a silent promise I would not be cast aside. Inside my office, I locked the door and drew the blinds, shutting out the world. My hands trembled slightly as I powered on my computer, but I forced them to steady. There was no room for weakness now. I opened the secure folder I had built in secret over the years, a digital vault holding every contract, every share transfer, every legal agreement that mattered. My father and Owen believed they were dealing with a woman who had never learned to play the real game, who had never understood how power worked in a man's world. But they were wrong. For 12 years I had watched and learned how deals were made in hushed boardrooms and over expensive dinners, how alliances shifted like sand in the wind. I had learned that in business, power was never given. It was taken. As the morning wore on, I sifted through file after file, my mind razor sharp. I found the document that would change everything, a shareholder agreement signed years ago when the company was on the brink of collapse. In exchange for my personal investment, my father had transferred an additional 15% of his shares to me. Years later, during a legal battle that nearly bankrupted us, he had used another 10% of his shares as collateral for a loan I personally guaranteed. He had never reclaimed them. Combined with my original 35%, that made me the majority shareholder, 60% of the company's voting power sat in my hands. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. I had the legal authority to override his decision to block Owen's appointment as CEO, but doing so would tear the last threads holding this family together. My father had always believed that bloodline was destiny, that a daughter could never be more than a temporary caretaker. I knew that challenging him would mean more than a boardroom battle, it would be a declaration of war. I thought back to the night before, to the polite applause and forced smiles of our extended family. None of them would ever see the long hours I spent in this office, the deals I had closed with sweat and nerve. They saw only the version of me my father had carefully curated, the dutiful daughter who followed orders, who would step aside without complaint. But they didn't see the woman who had fought tooth and nail to keep this company alive. They didn't see the nights I spent poring over balance sheets until my eyes burned the times I had to make the ruthless decisions no one else could stomach. This was my life's work, and I refused to let it be handed over to someone who had never put in the sweat, who had never stayed up late worrying about payroll and supply chains and whether the company would survive another quarter. As I leaned back in my chair, the sunlight glinting off the city skyline beyond the window, I felt the weight of everything I had sacrificed pressing against my chest. Friends lost to late nights and early mornings. A personal life that had withered on the vine while I built this empire. The quiet heartbreak of watching my father never truly see me, even as I turned his dream into a reality. I swallowed the bitterness and focused on the task ahead. I began drafting my own plan, outlining every step I would take in the days to come. I would not walk into that boardroom unprepared. When my father and Owen arrived on Monday to assume control, they would find a very different woman waiting for them, a woman who knew her worth and had the documents to prove it. I rehearsed every word I would say, every piece of evidence I would lay out before them. There would be no tears, no begging. Only the cold, hard truth, written in black and white. I was the majority shareholder, and they had no power to replace me. But even as I worked, a part of me mourned the loss of what could have been. I had always wanted to believe that this company was a family legacy, that my father would one day see me as his true partner. That dream was dead now. In its place was a single unwavering conviction: I would not let them take this from me. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls and quiet determination. My assistant knocked once to remind me of my afternoon meetings, but I waved her away. I had bigger battles to fight. As the sun set, I shut down my computer and sat in the darkened office for a long moment, the city lights beginning to twinkle like stars outside. My father and Owen would never see this coming. They thought they had won, that the story was already written. But they didn't know the real me, the woman who had built this company, not just with skill, but with her very soul. Tomorrow, I would walk back into this office and prepare for war. My father had made his choice. Now it was my turn to make mine, and I would show them that they were wrong to ever doubt me. In that quiet, empty office, I let myself feel the weight of what was coming: the battles, the betrayals, the possibility of losing everything I had fought so hard to build. But even that fear couldn't dim the fire in my chest, because I knew one thing for certain: I was not just Edward Ainsworth's daughter. I was Isla Jane, and I was ready to fight for everything I had earned. The morning of the showdown arrived with an electric stillness. The city beyond my window seemed to hold its breath, as if it too knew that today everything would change. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of my crisp white blouse, feeling the cool weight of determination settle over me like armor. My reflection stared back, unflinching Isla Jane, no longer the obedient daughter, but the architect of her own future. I arrived at Ainsworth Logistics headquarters early before the office fully woke. The usual murmur of polite conversation was hushed, replaced by the heavy, watchful silence of an army waiting to see which side would claim victory. I could feel the weight of every glance, every quick whisper. My father's announcement had set the entire company on edge. But as I walked down the gleaming marble corridor, each click of my heels against the floor was a silent declaration: I'm not afraid. My office was exactly as I had left it: orderly, efficient, a quiet testament to the countless hours I had spent here. The framed photos of company milestones lined the shelves, each one a reminder of what I had built. I took a seat at my desk, inhaling deeply as I powered on my computer. The screen flickered to life, displaying the file that would decide everything: the executive shareholders agreement. It felt almost surreal how a single document could hold the power to shatter decades of tradition and reshape the future. I had 15 minutes before they arrived. 15 minutes to steel my resolve and prepare for the fight of my life. My fingers drummed a silent rhythm against the desk as I reviewed the agreement once more. Every clause, every signature was seared into my memory. My father's name, Owen's scrawled signature, my own, written with a steadiness that had taken years to earn. At exactly 9:00 a.m., there was a sharp knock at my door. I didn't bother to respond. The door swung open, and there they were, my father and Owen, stepping into my office as if they already owned it. My father moved with the quiet authority of a man who had spent his life at the head of the table, his expression calm but resolute. Owen, dressed in a tailored navy suit that did nothing to disguise the triumph in his eyes, followed closely, a smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I didn't stand. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, my fingers steepled under my chin. "Good morning," I said evenly, my voice smooth as silk. "I trust you both know why you're here." My father's lips twitched in irritation. "Isla," he said, his tone patronizing, "this isn't a negotiation. We've already made the decision. Owen will be stepping in as CEO, and we expect your full cooperation in the transition." "Transition," I echoed softly, as if tasting the word. Interesting choice of phrasing. I shifted my gaze to Owen, who was practically vibrating with anticipation. "And you, Owen, do you understand what this entails?" he smirked. "I think I've got it handled." I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting them believe they still had control. Then, with a deliberate calm, I reached for the remote on my desk and pressed a button. The large screen mounted on the wall flickered to life, displaying the document I had spent the night memorizing, the executive shareholders agreement signed years ago, the one that held the key to everything. My father's face paled slightly. Owen shifted uneasily, his confidence faltering for the first time. "What is this?" my father asked, his voice tight. "This," I said, my tone still soft but unyielding, "is the agreement that governs the transfer of executive power within Ainsworth Logistics. It clearly states that any change in leadership requires the approval of the majority shareholder." Owen scoffed, stepping forward. "And you think that's you?" I met his gaze unflinchingly. "I don't think, Owen." "I know." With deliberate care, I highlighted the crucial clauses on the screen, each line a nail in the coffin of their ambitions. "I own 60% of the company's shares." I said, my voice ringing clear and strong, "which means any decision to appoint a new CEO without my consent is not just invalid, it's illegal." The weight of my words settled over the room like a thundercloud. My father's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides. Owen's smug expression twisted into a sneer of disbelief. "You're lying," he spat. "Dad, tell her she can't do this." My father didn't speak. His silence was answer enough. I rose from my chair, every inch of me radiating the authority they had tried to deny me. "This isn't about revenge," I said quietly, though the fury in my chest burned hotter than any flame. "This is about the fact that I have spent 12 years building this company, saving it from the brink, turning it into an industry leader. While you, Owen, were busy failing at every get-rich-quick scheme you could find, I was here fighting for every contract, every employee, every dollar." Owen's face flushed red with anger, but he had no words. My father, ever the strategist, was already calculating, trying to find a way to salvage this. But there was no path left for him. "You think this is a victory?" my father said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "You're tearing this family apart, Isla." I let out a breath, feeling the ache in my chest, but refusing to show it. "No, father. You tore this family apart the moment you decided my work was nothing more than a placeholder for your son's ambitions." The words hung in the air, stark and undeniable. Owen's eyes darted from me to our father, the reality of his defeat sinking in. My father closed his eyes briefly, as if trying to find the right words to fix the unfixable. But there were no words that could erase the years he had spent dismissing me, no apology that could unwrite the choice he had made to stand behind Owen instead of me. I gave them a choice, my voice measured and steady. "You can stay, both of you. But you will answer to me. Or you can walk away. I'll buy your shares at market value, and you can start over somewhere else. The choice is yours." For a long moment, the room was silent, the only sound the quiet hum of the air conditioner. Then, without a word, Owen turned on his heel and stormed out the door, slamming shut behind him. My father lingered a moment longer, his shoulders heavy with resignation. "You've changed," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper. I met his gaze without flinching. "No," I said softly. "I've simply stopped pretending." He nodded once, then turned and left, leaving me alone in the quiet, sunlit office. My heart was racing, my hands trembling just slightly as I sank back into my chair. I had won, but even as the thrill of victory coursed through me, a quiet ache settled in my chest, a bittersweet echo of everything I had lost to get here. The battle was over, but the war had only just begun. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at Ainsworth Logistics shifted like the tides. The employees who had once greeted me with warm smiles and quiet confidence now looked away, their eyes guarded, their expressions tight with uncertainty. It wasn't surprising. News of the confrontation had spread quickly, carried through the hushed conversations of department heads and the barely disguised curiosity of staff in the break room. My father and Owen had not walked away quietly, and I knew that every moment of silence in the office was filled with whispered questions. Who would come out on top? Who was truly in charge? Now I could feel the undercurrents of unease in every hallway I walked down. The boardroom, once a place where I felt the weight of my father's expectations, was now a battleground of loyalty and suspicion. I knew that behind closed doors, the narrative was already shifting. My father was a master of perception, And Owen, despite his failures, had always known how to play the part of the wounded heir. They moved quickly their campaign of whispers, as sharp and deliberate as any corporate takeover. Owen was the first to strike painting himself as the victim of a ruthless power grab. I could almost hear his voice slick with false sincerity as he told our family friends and longtime clients how I had stolen the company out from under him, how I had turned my back on everything our family had built together. My father, ever the statesman, didn't need to speak directly. A single sigh, a carefully placed pause in conversation, and he had already planted the seeds of doubt. They knew the value of perception. They understood that in the world of business, power wasn't just measured in contracts and shares, it was measured in stories. And they were crafting a story that painted me as the villain. For a brief moment, I felt the old ache of betrayal. A part of me still longed for my father's approval, still wanted him to see me as more than just his daughter. But that part of me had been buried the moment he had chosen Owen over me. Now all that remained was resolve. I wasn't about to let them win. If they wanted a war in the court of public opinion, I would give them one. That afternoon, I called an emergency executive meeting. As I stepped into the boardroom, I could feel the weight of every eye in the room. Half of them looked away, avoiding my gaze. The other half watched me too closely, searching for any crack in my composure. I took my seat at the head of the table, my seat, and let the silence stretch for a moment. I know there have been conversations, I said calmly, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Whispers in offices, backroom deals over drinks. Some of you are wondering if my leadership is sustainable, if I have what it takes to see this company through. No one spoke, but I could see the shift in their eyes. The challenge was clear, and I wasn't afraid to meet it head-on. I clicked the remote, and the screen behind me came to life with a presentation numbers charts, cold hard data. Under my leadership, I continued, Ainsworth Logistics has grown from a struggling regional firm to an industry leader worth over $80 million. In the past 5 years alone, we've expanded into 6 new markets and increased revenue by 300%. Paul, our CFO, can confirm there isn't a single financial indicator suggesting this company is in trouble under my guidance. Paul cleared his throat, his face pale. No, he said quietly. In fact, our projections show another 20% growth in the next quarter. I nodded, letting the silence settle in again. This isn't about the company's health, I said softly, my voice dangerous in its calm. This is about power. My father and Owen want you to believe that I'm reckless, that I'm unstable. But the truth is simpler than that. They're upset because I refused to step aside. They're upset because I didn't let them take what I built. For a moment, the room was still. Then, one of the senior executives, an older man who had always favored my father, shifted uncomfortably. I received a call, he said finally, his voice low. From Edward. He said he was considering an appeal to the board. I tilted my head slightly. And did he offer anything in return for your support? A pause, then a nod. Yes. I let out a slow breath, my eyes sweeping the room. There it is, I said softly. My father built this company, and I won't take that away from him. But I took it further than he ever imagined. And I will not let him manipulate it from the outside. If he wants a fight, he'll get one. I stood gathering my notes as I looked each executive in the eye. If any of you believe that my father and Owen deserve control of this company, if you truly believe that they can lead it better than I can, then now is your time to make your move. Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. And in that silence, I saw the truth. They might doubt me. They might fear me. But they would not dare stand against me. That night, I made another call. Not to a board member or an investor, but to an old friend in investigative journalism. I have something for you, I said, my voice steady. But you'll need to move fast. Within hours, I had sent her everything, documents, emails, financial records that told a story even my father couldn't control. A story of hidden debts and questionable business practices, of the messes I had spent years cleaning up behind the scenes. The article hit the next morning, Behind the Facade of Ainsworth Logistics, a legacy of hidden debts and financial cover-ups. It was a brutal takedown, but it was the truth. and it shifted the narrative in a way that even my father couldn't have predicted. Suddenly, the phone calls and emails from board members and investors weren't filled with doubt. They were filled with questions. Questions about the company's past, about the man who had once been its patriarch. And in that moment, I realized that my father's greatest weapon, his image, had finally cracked. The board stopped doubting me. The investors stopped hesitating. And my father, he had nowhere left to hide. As I sat in my office that night, the glow of the city stretching out below me, I felt the weight of the battle settle over me like a cloak. I had fought for my place and won, but I knew this wasn't the end. My father wouldn't back down easily. Owen would find new ways to paint himself the victim, and the world would keep watching, waiting to see if I would fall. But I wasn't afraid, because I had learned the most important lesson of all in business as in life. Power isn't something you're given. It's something you take and something you fight to keep. And I was just getting started. The exposé that had torn through the business world left no room for doubt. My father's carefully crafted image of unshakable leadership was gone, and so was Owen's fantasy of stepping into a crown he'd never earned. But in the quiet that followed, a new and unexpected truth emerged, one that I hadn't quite been prepared for. I had won. There was no denying that. The board no longer questioned my authority. Investors who had once regarded me with polite uncertainty now reached out with offers and opportunities, their tone respectful, even deferential. And yet, as I sat in my office late that night, the city's lights stretching out like a glittering web beneath the window, I felt a hollow ache at the center of my chest. For 12 years I had chased this, fought for it, with every ounce of determination I had. But victory, it turned out, was not the same as peace. The office was quieter than it had ever been. No calls from my father, no carefully worded emails from Owen. No one left to question my decisions or second-guess my strategies. Just the steady hum of the air conditioning and the soft glow of the monitors in front of me. The silence was almost suffocating. I found myself staring at the framed photograph on my bookshelf, a picture taken at a company picnic years ago. My father standing tall and proud in the center, Owen to his right and me to his left, my hand resting lightly on his shoulder. In that moment, captured in faded color, it looked as though we were a team, as though we were a family. I reached out and turned the photo face down, because the truth was, we had never been a team. My father had been the patriarch, Owen, the favored son, and I had been the quiet, capable daughter, always pushing forward, always hoping that if I just proved myself enough, they would finally see me. They never had. And now there was nothing left to prove. 2 days later, my father called. The number flashed on my phone, and for a brief second I hesitated. But I answered. "Isla," he said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tracing the edge of the desk. "Do we?" There was a pause, a long one. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "You didn't have to do it this way." I let out a small, humorless laugh. "Neither did you." He sighed, the weight of his breath heavy across the line. "This company was supposed to be a legacy. For both of you. For both of us," I repeated, my voice calm, though I could feel the tremor of old wounds beneath it. "But that's not what you wanted. You wanted Owen to have it, no matter the cost." Another pause. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "What happens now?" I closed my eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly. "Now I make sure you can never touch this company again." He didn't argue. He didn't offer empty promises or half-hearted apologies. In that silence, I understood that he finally saw the truth, that the daughter he had once dismissed as temporary had become something he could no longer control. The war was over. My father had lost. Owen had disappeared into the shadows of another failed venture, and I had emerged as the undisputed leader of Ainsworth Logistics. But there was no moment of triumph, no rush of vindication, just the quiet hum of the office and the knowledge that I had traded one kind of loneliness for another. In the weeks that followed, I focused on the work, my work. The company I had fought to save and build now stood firmly in my hands, and I threw myself into the task of shaping it into something even stronger. The old board members who had aligned themselves with my father were quietly replaced. Executives who had once questioned my decisions were shown the door. In their place, I built a team that shared my vision, people who believed in progress and innovation, not in the ghosts of a legacy that had nearly destroyed us. I introduced new initiatives, sustainability programs my father had dismissed as unnecessary technology investments he had deemed too risky. I forged partnerships that reached beyond the confines of logistics, pushing Ainsworth into new markets and new opportunities. The company's profits soared, our reputation stronger than ever. In less than a year, we crossed the $100 million mark, a milestone my father had once called impossible. And yet, even as I watched the numbers climb and the headlines shift from scandal to success, I felt the echo of what I had lost. My family was gone. Not in body, my father still lived in the city, Owen still existed somewhere in the haze of another half-baked venture, but in spirit. We were no longer bound by the shared dream of Ainsworth Logistics. That dream was mine now, and I was the only one left to carry it forward. Sometimes late at night, I would catch myself thinking of that old photograph, the three of us smiling as though nothing could break us. I wondered if there had been a moment, even a fleeting one, when my father had truly believed we were in this together. If Owen had ever looked at me and seen a partner, not a rival. But I didn't let those thoughts linger, because in the end, it didn't matter. My father had chosen to see me as temporary. Owen had chosen to see me as an obstacle, and I had chosen to become the person they could never ignore again. One afternoon, I met my father in a quiet conference room at headquarters. He looked older than I remembered, the lines of his face deeper. His shoulders hunched with a weariness that had nothing to do with age. "I'm retiring," he said simply. Effective immediately. I didn't react. I had seen it coming. And Owen, he's gone, my father admitted. Took the buyout. He won't be back. I nodded slowly, a part of me feeling the finality of those words, like the closing of a book I had spent my entire life trying to rewrite. My father hesitated, then said, almost as if the words cost him something, "I underestimated you." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I would ever get. And strangely, I found that I no longer needed it. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself deeper into the work, into building something that no one could ever take from me again. I watched as Ainsworth Logistics evolved beyond anything my father could have imagined, no longer a family business, defined by tradition and legacy, but a force driven by vision and ambition. I stood at the top floor of our headquarters one evening, the city bathed in the golden glow of sunset. Below me, the world moved on trucks and trains and planes, carrying goods to every corner of the country, all of them a testament to the empire I had built. And in that quiet moment, I understood the final truth: I had won, but I had also paid a price. The cost of power was steep, and it was loneliness. But it was a price I would pay again and again. Because in the end, I knew one thing for certain: I was no longer Edward Ainsworth's daughter. I was Isla Jane, the woman who had outmaneuvered everyone to claim her rightful place. And I was just getting started. I stood in my office late one evening, the city beyond my window bathed in the cold silver of moonlight. My reflection in the glass looked back at me, a woman who had fought her way through a war no one else could see, a woman who had built her own empire from the rubble of old loyalties. And yet, even in that quiet moment of victory, I felt the weight of what I had learned pressing against my chest, like a truth too heavy to ignore. Family, I realized, can be both your greatest strength and your greatest threat. The bonds we cherish most can be twisted into chains. The trust we offer most freely can be turned into a weapon. My father and Owen had taught me that in the harshest way possible. But they had also taught me something else: that the only loyalty that truly matters is the one you owe to yourself. I had spent years seeking my father's approval, believing that if I worked hard enough, he would see me, really see me, not just as his daughter, but as his equal. In the end, he never did. And maybe he never would. But that no longer mattered, because I had stopped seeking his validation the moment I took back what was mine. Looking out over the city, I knew that Ainsworth Logistics was no longer just a company, it was a testament to my resilience. Every contract signed, every expansion, forged every late night and early morning, was proof that power isn't given, it's taken. And once it's your responsibility to protect it from those who would strip it away. I understood now that leadership was more than numbers on a spreadsheet or names on a contract. It was the ability to weather betrayal and still stand tall, to build something so strong that no one, no father, no brother, no boardroom could ever tear it down. As I turned away from the window, the final lesson settled into my bones: stop seeking approval from those who will never give it. Instead, build something so unshakable, so undeniable, that they can never ignore you again. Because in the end, power is not a birthright, it's a choice. And I had made mine. Just then, my phone buzzed on the desk, a message from an unknown number. I opened it, and a single line of text blinked back at me. Think this is over. It's only the beginning. A shiver ran down my spine, but I smiled a slow, knowing smile that tasted of challenge and triumph. Let them come, I thought. Let them try. Because this was my empire now. And I would fight for it over and over again, no matter who tried to tear it from my hands. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And I was ready. Are you ready to watch it unfold?